We often search for meaning in complex ideas, yet some of the deepest truths walk quietly beside us on four legs. A dog never explains love, never argues its presence, and never asks to be understood. It simply is there. And in that silence, it reveals something we constantly forget in our noise-filled lives. That real connection doesn't need language, only presence. We usually talk about dogs as if they are something we own. We give them names, organize their routines, decide where they belong in the house, and casually say they are ours. But if you really stop and think about it, that idea doesn't quite fit. Anyone who has truly shared life with a dog can feel that something deeper is happening, something that doesn't sit comfortably within the idea of possession. What exists there feels much closer to a genuine relationship than ownership. People who have experienced what they call a soul dog recognize this instantly. The connection isn't something you can easily explain or define. It's quiet, steady, and undeniably real. In a world where people often hurt each other, where trust is calculated, loyalty is conditional, and love is given carefully, almost cautiously, a dog moves in a completely different way. It doesn't overthink, it doesn't compare, it doesn't hold back to see if it will receive the same in return. Its presence isn't based on strategy or expectation, it simply shows up, fully. And that realization brings an interesting question. If a way of being like this exists so close to us, walking beside us, lying at our feet, sharing our everyday lives, then maybe the real question isn't why we keep dogs, but why they were placed in our lives at all. Out of everything in existence, why would life arrange for them to walk so closely with us? To really understand what it means to have a dog, we might need to drop the label of pet. That word quietly limits what's actually happening. It categorizes, organizes, and suggests control, something to train, manage, or improve. But that perspective misses the deeper truth. A dog isn't just something that exists within your life. It represents a different way of being that exists right alongside yours. And that difference matters, because as humans we rarely stay fully present. Side of us is always stuck in the past, replaying what has already happened, while another part is busy imagining what might come next. Most of the time we are not truly here. A dog, on the other hand, seems to live almost entirely in the moment. It doesn't appear concerned about who it used to be. It doesn't seem worried about who it needs to become. There's no ongoing story it's trying to maintain about itself. So when you sit beside a dog, something unusual happens. Two completely different ways of experiencing life come together. You are thinking, analyzing, and talking to yourself internally. The dog is simply responding to what is happening right now. It isn't questioning its worth. It isn't wondering where things are heading. And when it looks at you, it doesn't judge you based on your past or measure you against some future version of yourself. It sees what is in front of it, nothing more, nothing less. And that's why the connection feels so immediate and powerful. Because the dog isn't interacting with your identity, your history, or your expectations. It is simply meeting you exactly as you are in this moment. It connects with you at the level of your presence, not your identity. And in that sense, the idea that you own a dog starts to fall apart. You don't really own a being like that. For a brief part of your life, you're simply trusted with something that already understands how to live. When you look at it closely, the way humans handle love is a bit complicated. We rarely allow it to remain simple. We think about it, analyze it, try to control it, and slowly begin attaching conditions to it, without even realizing. We say things like, "I'll stay if you stay. I'll love you if you change. I'll be loyal if you make me feel secure." And over time, love quietly turns into an unspoken deal, something we keep adjusting in our minds. There's nothing surprising about this. It's part of being human. We carry memories. We anticipate the future, and we try to protect ourselves from being hurt again. So we build these silent rules around love, but then right there beside us is a creature that doesn't seem to follow any of that. A dog doesn't come into your life expecting you to become someone else. It doesn't care about your image, your past, or your plans. It doesn't love you for a reason, it simply loves. Not as something it tries to do well, not as a moral effort, but as its natural state of being. This is what people have tried to describe for centuries when they talk about pure grace. A kind of love that doesn't need to be earned or explained. A dog lives in that state without effort, which is probably why dogs don't need philosophies or belief systems. They don't need to define what love is. They are already living it. Maybe that's why dogs are part of our lives. Not to teach us discipline or responsibility, but to quietly show us what love looks like before we start putting conditions on it. Not as an idea or a lesson, but as something alive right in front of us.
In that way, a dog becomes something grounding, almost like a steady point that keeps us from drifting too far into our own thoughts. Humans are incredibly good at getting lost in ideas, in stories, in explanations about life and about ourselves. We spend so much time thinking that we forget to simply be here.
Many spiritual teachings talk about awakening in a very simple way, not as something dramatic, but as being present, as accepting what is happening without constant resistance, as trusting the moment as it is. And that is exactly where a dog already lives. It doesn't hold on to past pain or build up a collection of old wounds. It returns quickly, even after being hurt. Not because it doesn't feel, but because it doesn't operate from calculation. It doesn't punish distance. It doesn't withdraw affection to make a point. It doesn't see openness as weakness. From the outside, this can look like innocence or even foolishness, but it's neither. It's a kind of clarity, a way of meeting life without defenses, without delay. People often joke and say that dogs are better than humans, but the truth is a bit deeper than that. Dogs aren't better. They reflect something in us that hasn't been shaped by fear.
They show what a human heart might look like before it learns to close itself. And maybe that's why losing a dog hurts so much. The grief can feel overwhelming, even surprising in its intensity. But that's only because the connection was never built on words or explanations. You didn't love your dog through ideas. You loved through shared moments, daily routines, quiet presence, the sound of them nearby, the comfort of touch, the kind of silence that never needed to be filled.
So when they're gone, it's not just a companion you lose. It feels like a way of being disappears with them. Almost like a certain kind of innocence leaves your life, leaving behind a space where something once made everything feel simple and safe without needing to explain why. When people say, "My dog understood me better than anyone," they don't mean the dog knew their opinions, their past, or the image they show the world. A dog doesn't recognize your persona. It senses something much quieter: your tone, your breathing, the small changes in your body when you feel calm or unsettled. It can tell when you're not at ease within yourself, and it stays anyway. So the pain of losing a dog isn't only about losing the animal. It's also about losing the version of yourself that could relax completely, without needing to explain or defend anything, just by being in the presence of another living being.
That's what really hurts. Not just the absence of companionship, but the loss of a kind of silent safety that didn't require words. At some point, another question starts to surface. Why does something like this exist only for such a short time? Why would life allow something so open, so pure, to pass through so quickly? Maybe it isn't random at all. Maybe dogs don't break our hearts by accident, but by design.
If love never ended, we might start taking it for granted. We might begin to treat it like something we own. But because it doesn't last forever, it reveals its true nature. Love isn't something we possess. It's something we step into for a while. A shared experience, not something we can hold on to permanently. A dog's short life quietly shows us things that are hard to put into words. That being present matters more than how long something lasts. That depth isn't measured in time. And that grief isn't the opposite of love. It's what love turns into when it no longer has somewhere to go. In that way, dogs aren't meant to stay forever. They come into our lives as temporary teachers, not lifelong fixtures. They arrive, give themselves fully, and when their time is done, they leave. And in doing so, they return us to a question we often avoid. Can we love completely, even when we know it won't last?
A dog answers that question not through explanation, but by the way it lives fully, openly, and without holding back.
There's also another way to look at it, and it's not the most comforting one. A dog doesn't truly belong to you, no matter how naturally we use that language. We say, "my dog," as if life itself can be owned. But if you pay attention, the relationship doesn't function like ownership at all. It feels more like a temporary crossing of paths. For a certain period, two lives move side by side. They share routines, quiet moments, and ordinary days. And during that time, something shifts in you. Not because the dog is trying to fix or improve you, but because it doesn't try at all. It pulls you out of your thoughts and back into the present. It softens you. It interrupts the heaviness that life can build. And just when you begin to feel like this will always be there, it ends. We call that a tragedy, but maybe it was never meant to be permanent in the first place. The mistake is assuming that it was.
People often believe they are the ones rescuing dogs, giving them a better life. But it could just as easily be the other way around. Dogs seem to appear at the exact moments when we are becoming too rigid, too calculated, too disconnected.
And when that shift has happened, they leave as naturally as they came. In the end, maybe what matters most isn't the dog itself, but what it keeps pointing toward. When a dog looks at you, open, unguarded, present, there's no hidden agenda there, no expectations, no plans, no quiet demands. It isn't asking if you'll always protect it or never leave. It's asking something much deeper. Can you live like this too? Can you show up without defenses? Can you stay without needing guarantees? Can you love without trying to control what happens next? If you can, even for a moment, then the dog has already fulfilled its purpose. Because it was never here to be perfected or shaped into something better. It was here to remind you of something you already carry. And if something greater could speak through a dog, it wouldn't argue or try to convince you. It wouldn't ask you to believe anything.
It would simply sit beside you and say, in the quietest way possible, stop overthinking, just be here.
I'm with you. And that, by itself, is enough. There's something even more subtle going on in this connection that most people don't notice right away. A dog doesn't just offer companionship. It quietly changes the way you experience time. When you're with a dog, the constant pressure to be somewhere else, to become something else, begins to loosen. You're not being evaluated. You're not being asked to perform or prove anything. And in that space, something in you starts to settle. Humans spend so much of their lives trying to be understood, trying to explain who they are, trying to justify their feelings or decisions. But a dog doesn't need your explanations. It responds to something deeper than words. That's why sitting silently next to a dog can feel more comforting than a long conversation with another person. There's no effort involved, no need to shape yourself into something acceptable.
Over time, this begins to affect you in ways you don't immediately recognize. You start to notice how much of your life is built on tension, on subtle forms of defense, on the need to control outcomes. And then you see a creature that lives without any of that. And it quietly challenges the way you've been living. Not by teaching, not by correcting, but simply by being different.
This is why people often feel a strange sense of calm just watching a dog rest or play or exist without urgency. It reminds you of something you've forgotten, not something new, but something very old and very familiar. A way of being that doesn't rely on constant thinking. And there's also a kind of honesty in a dog that's difficult to find elsewhere. A dog doesn't pretend. It doesn't hide how it feels. If it's happy, you see it immediately. If it's uneasy, you feel that too. There's no mask, no performance. And being around that kind of honesty can slowly make you more honest with yourself. You begin to notice your own patterns more clearly, the ways you hold back, the ways you complicate things that could be simple, the ways you distance yourself from others out of fear. And without realizing it, the dog becomes a mirror, not reflecting your image, but reflecting your state of being.
There's also something important about the way a dog stays. Not in a possessive way, not in a demanding way, but in a steady, consistent presence. It doesn't disappear when things get uncomfortable. It doesn't withdraw affection as a strategy. That kind of consistency is rare, and it creates a kind of quiet trust that doesn't need to be spoken.
And maybe that's why their absence feels so profound. Because what's gone isn't just a companion, it's the environment they created around you. a space where you didn't have to be anything other than what you already were. But even after they're gone, something of that doesn't completely disappear. If you pay attention, you can still access that same sense of presence they brought into your life. It's not tied to the dog itself, but to what the dog revealed in you. The ability to be still, to be open, to exist without constantly analyzing everything. In that sense, the relationship doesn't really end. It changes form. What was once external becomes something internal. The dog is no longer beside you, but the way it allowed you to experience life can remain if you let it. And maybe that's the quiet invitation behind all of this. Not just to love a dog, but to learn something from the way it lives.
To carry a small part of that presence into your own life, to meet people a little more openly, to hold a little less tightly, to trust moments without needing to control them.
It doesn't mean becoming passive or naive. It means recognizing that not everything needs to be managed in order to be meaningful. Some things are valuable precisely because they are temporary, because they cannot be held on to. A dog shows you that in the simplest way possible. It doesn't explain it. It doesn't try to convince you. It just lives it right in front of you every single day. What makes this connection even more profound is that it slowly reshapes how you understand attachment itself. Most human relationships are built on expectation, even when we don't admit it. We expect consistency. We expect understanding. We expect people to behave in certain ways so we can feel safe inside the bond. And when those expectations aren't met, distance begins to form. A dog doesn't participate in that system. It doesn't negotiate emotional terms. It doesn't silently keep score.
It doesn't build resentment around small moments of misunderstanding. It just returns again and again to presence. That return is simple, but it's also rare in a world where almost everything is conditional.
And because of that, a dog changes the emotional atmosphere around you without trying to. You start to realize how much of human interaction is filled with hidden tension. What was said, what wasn't said, how something was interpreted, what might be remembered later. With a dog, all of that complexity dissolves. There is no reinterpretation of your actions. There is only the moment as it is. This is also why dogs can feel like they accept you in a way people struggle to. Not because they understand your entire story, but because they aren't trying to rewrite you into something else. They don't relate to your potential version. They relate to what is actually present in front of them. That kind of acceptance feels almost unfamiliar to humans, because we are so used to being evaluated, even by those who care about us. And over time, this can soften something inside you.
You begin to realize how exhausting it is to constantly maintain an identity, even in subtle ways. The way you speak, the way you act, the way you adjust yourself depending on who is watching. A dog doesn't participate in that performance. It doesn't react to your image. It reacts to your state.
So slowly, you start to feel what it's like to be seen without being interpreted. And that creates a strange kind of relief. Not excitement, not stimulation, but relief. The feeling that you don't have to hold yourself together in a particular way to be accepted in that moment. This is also where the emotional bond deepens beyond words. It's not built on shared beliefs or conversations or explanations. It's built on repetition, routine, and quiet familiarity. The sound of footsteps, the way a presence fills a room, the simple rhythm of being near each other without needing anything from one another. That's why even ordinary moments become meaningful. Sitting on the floor, waiting by the door, walking the same path every day. None of it feels important in the usual sense, but together it creates a kind of emotional stability that is hard to replicate elsewhere.
And when you lose that, what feels unbearable is not just absence, but the sudden silence of that stability. The space where something used to exist without effort. Life feels slightly less anchored, not because something dramatic is missing, but because something simple is gone. But there's another layer to this that often goes unnoticed. A dog doesn't just change how you feel, it changes how you relate to control. Humans are constantly trying to reduce uncertainty. We want to know what happens next. We want emotional guarantees. We want stability that doesn't shift. A dog lives completely outside of that demand.
It doesn't ask for certainty. It doesn't require guarantees. It exists in a flow that doesn't resist change. And being around that, even unconsciously, can challenge your need to control everything around you. Not by force, but by contrast. You begin to see how much suffering comes from trying to hold life still, and how much ease comes from allowing it to move without constant resistance. A dog doesn't argue with life, it responds to it. And maybe that's why the bond feels so pure, because in its presence, you don't have to keep defending your existence or your emotions. You don't have to translate yourself into something understandable. You just are, and that is enough. Even after they're gone, that imprint remains. Not as memory alone, but as a shift in perception.
Something in you remembers what it felt like to be with a being that didn't complicate love, didn't restrict presence, didn't condition affection. And once you've experienced that, you don't see connection in the same way again.
It quietly changes your standards for what real presence feels like, not in a demanding sense, but in a clearer one. And in that clarity, even human relationships can begin to feel different when they are grounded in something more honest, less controlled, and more real. There's another layer to this that goes even deeper, and it's how a dog subtly reshapes your understanding of vulnerability. Most humans are taught, directly or indirectly, that vulnerability is something to manage carefully. We open up in measured ways, we protect certain parts of ourselves, and we often wait for safety before we fully let someone in. A dog doesn't operate within that framework. It doesn't demand that you prove yourself worthy of openness. It doesn't test your emotional boundaries. It simply exists close to you, steady and unguarded. And in that closeness, something in you begins to lower its defenses without instruction.
And what's interesting is that this lowering doesn't feel like loss of control. It feels like release. Because for once, you're not constantly scanning for judgment or consequence. You're not trying to manage how you're perceived. You're just present in a shared space where nothing needs to be defended. Over time, this can expose something very honest about human nature. A lot of emotional tension doesn't come from actual danger, but from anticipation. We rehearse reactions in our minds, we predict misunderstandings, we prepare for rejection even before it happens. A dog interrupts that cycle simply by not participating in it. It pulls you back into what is actually happening, not what might happen.
And in that return to the present, you start noticing how much energy is normally spent on internal dialogue. The constant commentary in the mind, the replaying of conversations, the imagined outcomes of situations that are not even real yet. With a dog nearby, that noise often becomes softer, not because it is forced to stop, but because something more immediate takes its place. A living presence that doesn't analyze you. There is also something quietly transformative in the way a dog forgives. Not in the moral sense, but in the absence of holding on. A moment passes and it is gone. There is no emotional archive being built out of small mistakes or misunderstandings. No slow accumulation of resentment. That kind of emotional reset is rare in human behavior, where memory is often tied to meaning, and meaning is often tied to pain.
Being around that kind of simplicity can make your own emotional responses feel heavier in comparison. You start to notice how long you can hold on to things that no longer exist in the present moment. And without being told to change, you begin to question why you hold on to them at all.
There's also a quiet lesson in the way dogs relate to time. They don't treat moments as steps towards something else. There's no sense that now is only valuable because of what comes after it. Now is complete in itself. Eating, resting, walking, waiting, all of it is fully experienced without being mentally relocated into the future. Humans, by contrast, are often living slightly ahead of themselves. Even in peaceful moments, part of the mind is already planning, adjusting, or preparing. A dog brings you back from that forward pull, not through instruction, but through presence so consistent it becomes hard to ignore. And maybe this is why the bond feels so grounding. It doesn't add anything artificial to your life. It removes a layer of unnecessary complexity. It strips experience back to something more direct, more immediate, more real. Even the silence around a dog feels different. It's not empty silence.
It's filled silence. The kind that doesn't need to be fixed or filled with words, just shared.
And when you think about it, very few relationships allow for that kind of ease. Most require maintenance in some form, emotional explanation, social negotiation, identity management. But with a dog, you are not required to translate yourself into something acceptable. You are simply met as you are. That is why the emotional imprint is so lasting, because what you experienced was not just companionship, but a different state of being alongside another life. A state where love didn't require effortful definition, where presence didn't need justification, and where connection didn't depend on performance. And once you've known that, even briefly, it doesn't disappear completely. It stays as a reference point inside you, a quiet reminder of what it feels like when nothing in you has to be adjusted in order to be accepted.
A dog never truly leaves you with answers. It leaves you with awareness. It quietly shows that love was never meant to be owned, controlled, or explained, only lived in its purest presence. And when it's gone, what remains is not just memory, but a deeper understanding of connection without conditions. You don't move on from that bond. You carry it forward as a softer way of being in the world.